and welcome to the second public forum on COVID and sport put on by the Faculty of Sport at the University of the West Indies. I must start with a sincere apology for the late start. Having sat down and worked out all our pre-show programming, there was a sudden major catastrophe which has been resolved by the people at Mona Information Technology Services, which was done very, very quickly, but nonetheless we're very sorry for this late start. This is the second, as I mentioned, of our fora. The first, which was a general overview on the devastating effect of COVID-19 and sport, especially to the region, was viewed by over 1,000 viewers and gained a lot of attention around the region. That general overview is to be followed up by specific focus on certain areas, starting today with the effects on high school sport, college and university sports. And next week we'll be looking at how it's affected athletes in particular, and we'll be talking to some of the athletes. And the following week, we'll be looking at governance and policy, and we'll be joined by the Minister of Sport of Barbados, the Honourable John King, amongst other ministers from the region and policy makers. But today, the forum is all about high school and intercollegiate sport. We've assembled a panel comprising of experts in this field and have some special invited guests who will be coming in from time to time. The panelists are Mrs. Amanda Reifer, the head of the Academy of Sport at Cave Hill in the Faculty of Sport, and the lady with the pulse on sport in Barbados. She is involved in a lot of policy-making decisions and will inform us as to how COVID-19 has affected sport both at a university level and at a national level in Barbados. Dr. Dorothy Hudson Gayle is in charge of the Athletic Development and Training section of the Mona Academy of Sport in the Faculty of Sport. And she's also the president of the Intercollegiate Association of Jamaica and will, of course, inform us of what's happening in Jamaica. Mr. Gabre-Jesu McTair is the Assistant Director of Physical Education and Sport in the Ministry of Sport of Trinidad and Tobago, with special responsibility for high school sports in that country. And our fourth panelist is Emmanuel Stewart, a University of the West Indies student athlete who's also a professional cricketer hailing from Carriacou in Grenada, or one of the Grenadines in Grenada, and is a Windward Island cricketer. And our guests will include the president of the Intersecondary School Association of Jamaica, Mr. Keith Weatherbird, and we will talk about Mr. Keith Wellington, and we will introduce the others as we go along. So to get started, we're going to look at the effect of COVID-19 on high school sports in the Caribbean. And we're looking at a perspective in Trinidad and Tobago. We invite Mr. Gabre-Jesu McIntyre and ask him, what has the effect been in Trinidad and Tobago? What sort of sports were taking place? And what has been displaced by this whole crisis?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansingh, for having me here and having Trinidad and Tobago invited on this forum. With respect to school sports in Trinidad and Tobago, we were about to enter the height of the track and field season when, of course, COVID-19 would have hit. I think our first positive case was in around about mid-March. So we may have just had one or two primary school level races taking place or competitions taking place in track and field. And as I said, we're about to get into the real meat of the season when, of course, we had to make a pause. High school basketball also tends to take place around this time, so that season would have been affected naturally. You have other seasons, tennis. We had a number of tennis tournaments about to take place at our National Racket Center. All of those, of course, are now on pause. So essentially, we are in a situation whereby we are waiting for word from the government of Trinidad and Tobago, to the Ministry of Health, and also to the Ministry of Education, who has the true remit over what takes place with regard to sport in our schools. And based on those indications, we will have a better idea as to how we move forward. As we get closer to July, August, that is normally the time frame whereby football is being, or at least the preparations for the football season is taking place. And that's one of our biggest school sport events for the year, our, as we call it, intercol season. How it is we go forward in terms of coaches, well, first and foremost, if it is we could actually have team sport. As it is right now, it might be a case where with the recommendations that can come forward from our Ministry of Health, it could be a case where maybe only individual sports are looked at. It could be a case where only sports with very small groups are looked at. So we are not very sure at this particular point in time, as we are still in some measure of lockdown and stay-at-home engagement. We're not very sure right now exactly how it is we can move forward. There are, of course, some ideas in place. And
well, we're going to be actually looking at those ideas going forward. In fact, as we talk to the athletes, we're going to get their input as to how we see this whole thing going forward. I'm just going to switch to Amanda very quickly to say, Amanda, Barbados seems to be more in a opening up mode than anywhere in the Caribbean. What has the effect been, and how do you see us moving forward with high school sport in particular in Barbados?
Well, thank you, Dean Mansingh. Yes, in Barbados, we're still under lockdown. I believe there's going to be gradually coming out of lockdown from Monday. Very small steps to going back to some form of normalcy. But the impact in Barbados has been tremendous, I believe, like many other of the islands, and I should say around the world, because the high school sports and even tertiary sports have been on total shutdown, a complete cessation of all training, all the use of gym facilities, training facilities, and so forth. So there was an immediate impact, of course, because of the preservation of the health and wellness of our athletes. That was first and foremost. But there has been no activity thus far, and I believe that the various federations and the principals of the different schools and the different meets across the sporting disciplines are engaged fully in discussions as to what steps they're going to take when we do come out of full lockdown. But we are currently on lockdown, and just looking to see how we can move forward when the lockdown is lifted.
And that, I guess, is the million-dollar question: what happens going forward?
Absolutely.
We switch to Jamaica very quickly. Mr. Keith Wellington is the president of the Inter-Secondary School Association of Jamaica, but himself the principal of St. Elizabeth Technical High School, the University of Cricket of Jamaica, but of course well known in football and track and field as well. Mr. Wellington, before we get to the big issue, which is champs, let's look at some of the other sports that were affected. I know some of the junior cricket would have been affected in high schools. What else would have been sort of disrupted by COVID-19? I think you might be on mute there, Mr. Wellington.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for having me, Dr. Mansingh, and good afternoon to my colleagues across the Caribbean and to your viewers and listeners. Yes, we would have had a number of sporting events that would have been affected by the COVID-19 scenario. Cricket, we were at the stage where we were at the finals of our rural area cricket competitions and the semi-finals for the urban areas. We were unable to play junior cricket. We have 3 levels of cricket competitions for our schools: under 14, under 16, and under 19. So we were not able to play any under 14 or under 16 cricket at all. The under 19s were at their finals, and that had to be canceled. Basketball, we just completed basketball the day before we shut down for the under 19s and under 16s, but no under 14 basketball. Girls football, we were unable to complete. And of course, we had other competitions slated for later in the year that we were also unable to stage.
Just to give an idea to our listeners, how many schools fall under ISO?
We have 172 high schools in Jamaica, and all of them are ISA member schools.
And I reckon that within the sort of sports that you've mentioned, that would have affected upwards of 500 students and their participation in school sports.
Much more than 500, without mentioning champs.
Well, we haven't even mentioned that yet.
We would have thousands of students who did not get a chance to participate in their various sporting events.
And so, turning to champs, and of course, you can give us a brief history of champs, because I believe it's what, the 100 and, how many years now that we've had champs running?
110.
110th year.
110
and has there ever been an interruption in champs?
There was one interruption in 1944 because of World War II. That's the only other time we have not had champs in the 110 years.
So our 109th staging got disrupted. Now, how devastating is that? Firstly, to ISA as an organization, understanding that a lot of your revenues probably come from this one event.
Of course, and it is devastating for us. Luckily, I think that we have had discussions that would mitigate some of the issues that we would end up with had it not been for the good relationships we have with our sponsors and other partners. However, it has taken a big hit for us. Champs has become an international event, so not only has it affected us, but there are many other stakeholders who would have been negatively impacted because of the cancellation of champs. We had to cancel just about less than 2 weeks before we were scheduled to start. And so there's a number of misplacements that would have occurred because of the late cancellation. I see that Dr. Mansingh is offline. I'm not sure if the program is still online.
No, we're hearing you. We're hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. All right, good. Right, so a number of stakeholders would have been affected, not just us as an entity, but as I said, we have close to 170 schools who would have been registered to participate, over 3,000 athletes, and all the other entities that are related to staging of champs.
And of these 3,000 athletes, how many would be in their final champs? The class one about to pass out, how many you reckon would be out of 3,000?
I'm not certain, but I would assume it would probably be close to a couple of hundred. We have 4 age groups for the girls, and 3 for the boys, covering a 5-year span. So I would suggest that maybe it's about 200.
Now, is there any recourse for them? Because of course, a lot of them use champs as the stepping stone for either getting a sports scholarship to University of the West Indies or any other institution within the Caribbean or outside, but also in launching their sort of amateur career headed towards professional career. What sort of recourse is there for those 200 odd students who may not be able to take part in champs ever again?
Well, I think the fortunate thing for us is that the structure of our athletics program would have ensured that all of these kids would have been involved in some track and field meets prior to champs. So not only were they preparing to participate and represent their schools at champs, but they would have been actively engaged in other events leading up to champs. So many of them would have competed in as many as 6 or 7 events prior to champs this season. In addition to the fact that most of these final year athletes would have been attending champs on previous years. So many of them have profiles that they can refer to if it is a matter of scholarships. And many of the universities who would have been offering them scholarships would already be aware of them and what they are capable of. And I think for us, if you look at I know our local universities would be fully aware of what they are capable of. The universities in the US, which many of them gravitate to, they also have their histories, and they would have made provisions for students who have not performed this season, or who would have challenges with their academics based on the fact that they would have waived the SAT scores. So I think there are a number of things that have been put in place to facilitate the difficulties that they would have.
I'm just going to, before I go to the next question, just point out to the viewers that your comments will be monitored by Ms. Athna Sharp, who will then put them forward to us as they come in. So please do send your queries and comments as soon as you can, because we'll try and slot them in as is relevant. But Mr. Wellington, is there any possibility of putting together a database of these performances leading up to champs that universities could actually go to and use as a reference?
Well, there is a possibility. It's unfortunate that we don't currently have a structure in place, But what we have done over the last 8 months or so at ISA, we have started to create our own database with students' performance records. I think we would have gathered some of that information for this season. The only issue we would have now is finding the method by which we are able to share it. But we do, over the last year especially, we have collected students' performance results at all the different meets. And this is something that we initiated this year. So individuals can ask us and we provide them. But more importantly, I think that we should be making the effort, or we will be making the effort to make this data shareable amongst whomever is interested.
Just going to bring in Emanuel Stewart, a student athlete. As we said, he's actually pursuing the bachelor's in sports science at Cave Hill, but his athletic background is in cricket, where he was the captain and wicketkeeper of the Windward Islands under-19, well, in fact, all of the youth teams, and went on to become the captain of the West Indies under-19 team as well, a member of the World Cup winning West Indies under-19 team in 2016, and has been playing with the Windward Volcanoes in the first class season, which was abruptly ended as well, and performing quite well. So welcome, Emmanuel, and I guess we'll start off just by asking you a bit about what's happening in Grenada and, well, let's start with Grenada and Carriacou in particular, and the Windward Islands in general with regards to COVID and its effect on the islands.
Greetings, Dr. Mansingh. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. In Grenada right now, everything is on lockdown in terms of the sporting disciplines. This week, the country actually opened back up for normal working hours. But in terms of the sporting aspect of it, I think we were actually just completed the relay meets, the KFC relay meets in February, and we were about to head into Intercol, which was supposed to be held in March, but that has to be put off again because of COVID. Also, those two events are used to select the character teams, and of course characters as cancelled as well. So I think, you know, COVID has a number of effects on the island of Grenada and even Carriacou. We had just completed the cricket tournament there as well.
Just tell me a bit about Carriacou
January.
itself in terms of its size, population, and number of COVID cases as you go into what was going on there.
It's 12 square miles.
And how many people?
There's no cases there. There's actually been a new case today in Grenada, 8-year-old girl. So that's been it pretty much.
So if we're to open up sports in the Caribbean, Carriacou is the place to go to. Screen everybody and start sports in Carriacou, and let's get on with it. Mr. Wellington, we could have champs in Carriacou. But Emmanuel, just talking on your own, your own perspective, you're in the middle of a good first-class season. I'm going to share with everybody, because you've allowed me to, that you're actually boasting a GPA of 3.10 while you're playing professional cricket, just to show that this can be done. But how has this affected you now going forward with regards to your own training and your own outlook for cricket going into the summer?
I think I've actually had a decent season thus far for the Windward Island Volcanoes. As a team, we weren't up there, but I think personally it was a decent run. It was challenging for me personally. I was in Trinidad just before COVID came into play, and we had to, the game finished 3 days. It lasted 3 days. So normally the team would leave the Monday, but we had the opportunity to leave the day before because of COVID. So that was pretty good. I was disappointed that the season had to end. There was 2 games remaining in the season, and we weren't able to complete that. But I was happy with the performance, and I can't really say when I'll be out there on the park again, but of course I'm preparing. I'm still receiving workouts from the trainer of the team, and I'm still trying to make the most out of this lockdown, because whenever the next opportunity comes, I just need to be ready to grab it with both hands.
Amanda Reifer, head of the programs at Cave Hill. How does this whole thing affect your intake coming up to the next academic year with regards to sports scholarships, or just, you look at not just Barbados, but the whole of the Eastern Caribbean? How has this affected your ability to offer scholarships and bring in students?
Well, first let me say that there's nothing fixed. So as much as we continue to plan, we at the university don't know exactly what the impact in its totality would be financially to the campus. So we are continuing to do our recruitment. We're continuing to engage athletes around the region. There's a team of coaches across the sporting disciplines. We met with the coaches to see any of the athletes that they were looking at. We had some conversations with potential awardees of scholarships and grants this year. So we're moving ahead as we normally do in the timelines that we normally do it. But the reality is that we have to wait and see what the effect of it is financially, because as you can appreciate, a scholarship fees to each scholarship awardee, and then the grants. So there is a financial implication, but we are moving ahead and we're acting as if we're continuing with our projections and our targets. We usually give out 10 scholarships, sport scholarships, and 10 sport grants every year at Cave Hill campus. And until we hear otherwise from the hierarchy, we will be moving in that direction. One of the things that I wanted to make mention of is during this time, we've paid a lot of emphasis and a lot of attention on the welfare of all of our student athletes. For those athletes who could not get out, as in the non-nationals, non-Barbadians who could not get back home, there were about 20 of those, many of them cricketers, and we've been taking care of them, making sure that we're checking, because as much as we're talking about the economic impact, as sport administrators, we have to ensure these are our charges and our wards while they're under our care. And so we've been making sure that they had enough food supplies and amenities, and they've been able to get around when they need to, doctor visits. And even in terms of the impact, in terms of those student athletes that would have undergone surgeries, we had a number of surgeries taking place prior to COVID. We still had to ensure the follow-up visits, the physiotherapy treatment, and so there's a whole process, is a whole environment and team of people that are behind these student athletes during this time. One more point about mental health. I think that is extremely important for us to consider and to ensure that these student athletes, many of them don't say what is happening. Many of them are not forthcoming with information. So we've tried to utilize our coaches who have the relationships with many of the athletes to try to drill down to find out how they're really doing from a mental health standpoint. So those are some of the issues, Dean, that we've been looking at as we move forward and we start to plan ahead for post-COVID.
And of course, another person looking ahead for scholarships and so on is Dorothy Hudson Gayle, who's integrally involved with the sports scholarships at Mona. So once again, no champs, no sports in terms of basketball and so on. How are you going to go about looking at just the effect on scholarship athletes at UWI? Mona. I think you muted, Dorothy.
Well, thank you, Dean, for having me, and good afternoon to everyone. Well, for us at Mona, it has been very challenging. We have, however, been engaging with our athletes who we have in-house right now, ensuring, that they get taken care of while they're on campus, and also continuing to offer them student development activities. Actually, just last night, we had a session for the athletes who we know will be leaving to go into the workplace. So we had a session on how to dress and how to attend the interview. And we've been working with them on other matters like, preparing your resume, cover letter, so on and so forth. We've also been conducting virtual study sessions. So we have, students come in, some will come in and just show us what it is that they are going to be doing for the hour, 2 hours. And we stay with them. Some members of my staff will sit in the room with them. In addition, you know, we've been with the ones who we're expecting to come in, we've still been engaging with some of the athletes, especially the really outstanding athletes that we really don't want to lose. And as Amanda says, you know, we keep working as if everything is going to be all right for September. As you know, Dean, we have over 120 students on sports scholarship usually. 107 scholarships offered by the university and 13 from the UECB project, which is kind of tied to the 5K run. We're hoping also that that 5K run can go off in November, because that again is going to affect the amount of money that we can get for these scholarships. But we're still planning and hoping that the entire year 2020 will not be lost. We will be keeping the athletes who we have and, you know, continuing to take care of them, and just hope that the financial situation of the university doesn't get so bad that we can't afford to continue to give them scholarship.
Well, as the caption showed, you're also the president of the Intercollegiate Association of Jamaica. Now, how many tertiary institutions do you have in that association?
21.
That's 21 tertiary institutions,
right now.
Is it?
And boy, everything came to an abrupt halt, like, bam. 21 institutions, which would be universities, teachers' colleges, polytechnics, everything. We were in the middle of our cricket competition. In fact, the 50 overs cricket was almost at the close for the senior teams, and everything just stopped. We didn't even get to do track and field because our track meet was supposed to be held like the week after champs, and that we didn't get to do. We didn't start hockey or badminton, but we're in the middle of volleyball and rugby. And, you know, some institutions were more impacted than others because some really expected to be crowned champions in those sports. And, you know, it is very disappointing for them.
Lost bragging rights.
Yes, really much so. With the track and field, we are happy and sad. And I say that because we're sad that the athletes didn't get to participate, because some of them were really looking, this is their final year at the institution, and we're looking forward to, you know, showing off their skill again, and hopefully this is another qualifying meet to try to make it to the national program. But for us at Intercol, it is very challenging because of funding. So when I say happy and sad, because we were really challenged in getting funding to host that meet. So the Lord might have shined upon us a little bit.
Well, when you speak of funding and avenues of funding, Mr. McTair, with regards to Trinidad and Tobago, how does one approach the loss of revenue at a high school region? Is there a lot of sponsorship that takes place, and you know, how are you going to go about next year executing the business of high school sport?
Well, funding is sometimes a challenge. The government of Trinidad and Tobago tends to pump a lot of funding into high school sports manifesting itself. We do get some sponsorship as well from the private sector. Considering how things are now and the economic effect that we expect to experience from the preparations and also, you know, taking care of the fallout, the social assistance that is going into persons who might have been unemployed or lost their jobs due to this particular time period. We are not too sure exactly how it's going to affect sport in general, not just to mention school sports, especially when you take into account that, of course, the Olympics has been postponed. You have the likelihood next year that if it is we are in a pretty bad economic situation, the focus will be on high performance and elite sport, and you will probably have less of financing going to the development of school.
Mr. Wellington had mentioned that he's got excellent relations with the sponsors for high school sport in Jamaica. What's the situation in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of corporate support for high school sport?
We do have some level of corporate support. That goes without saying. Of course, many corporate bodies will feel the pinch because of this particular, let's say, almost a month and a half to 2 months of lockdown. We only just opened up some businesses as of Monday, this Monday gone. And that would have been directed at particular types of businesses. There are many others who in the manufacturing sector, and so that may assist in terms of sport being able to take place. That may feel a very drastic drop in revenue. And we're not too sure as yet how that is going to translate towards the sponsorship of sport events at school level, at national level in the upcoming months. So as Amanda Reifer would have mentioned, it's really a wait and see. There's no firm understanding as yet as to what the effects are going to be of the pandemic, the financial fallout, and how that affects sport.
Well, today we've heard in the news that the Olympic Associations, or the Olympic Committee, IOC, is actually going to be putting aside a significant amount, I think it's $800 million, to sort of offset a lot of the problems that took place with the organizers, the governing bodies and so on, and what they may have lost, and development for athletes coming next year. That was followed by IAAF speaking about millions of dollars to be given out to athletes who may have lost their livelihoods from not being able to compete and so on. But for the high schoolers and the intercollegiate people, Mr. Wellington, what sort of support can we expect in Jamaica for high schools that may have expended a certain amount of money in preparation for sport, or for the athletes themselves? Is there anything forthcoming or provisioned in the sort of emergency measures? I think you're muted there, Mr. Wellington.
I think that it is unlikely that we will see funds going directly to our schools or athletes from ISA or governing body or the government. Where I think your schools are likely to get support, it is actually from the other interest groups, their past students or individual schools that have sponsors. But reminding ourselves that our high school sports are strictly amateur sports, and therefore schools are encouraged to spend only what they are able to afford. Some schools are able to afford more than others because of the support they get from external stakeholders. But from ISA's perspective, we do not generate enough funding to allow us to provide cash to our member schools, especially where we are unable to stage our competitions, because all our funding, we do not get any financial support from government. All our funding comes from sponsorship and gate receipts for our competitions. And right now, those sponsorships amount are restricted to what we get for cricket, football, and track and field, which in turn has to be spread across all the different sports. I think we offer about 17 different competitions from 9 different sports. And so we really don't have that except we are able to each year properly fund these events or satisfactorily, but not carry over enough monies across years so that we'll be able to have monies to do that. But our schools have always understood that they share a burden of responsibility in terms of preparation for our events. And in some cases, for my school in particular, by not participating at champs, I actually saved quite a tidy sum.
Which is what some of the others have said as well. Yes, good and bad they're saying. But as we sort of bring this segment to an end, what advice do you have to your membership? I'm talking about both the high schools and to their actual students going forward. How do we approach the next year?
Well, first of all, whatever is to happen has to take into consideration the safety and well-being of our students, first and foremost, as well as our communities, because this thing is not restricted to any one small geographic area or one particular demographics of persons. So whatever that we are looking forward to, we have to remind ourselves that we have to take that into consideration. However, as schools and as persons responsible for sports, we recognize the value of sports in our children's development, and we will do whatever is within our powers when it is safe to do so to allow our student athletes the opportunity to participate in events that they really love and cherish, and which in many cases, these opportunities are lifelong opportunities that provide them with the opportunity for development that they would not otherwise have had, especially in terms of scholarships to tertiary institutions or just development towards professional sport. So we are going to be doing whatever we can to ensure that at the soonest possible time, we will be able to accommodate these events. And I'm sure that our principals and our schools will take into consideration the importance of the students' safety and well-being.
Wise words from Mr. Wellington. I want to thank you very much for joining us for this forum. We're going to shift the focus towards some of the athletes who may have been affected. And we'll welcome in Shannan Skeete, who is the national champion of Barbados Taekwondo, but is herself a black belt in Shotokan Karate, and was looking forward to some major games when this came to an end. Welcome, Shannan, and tell us, what were you preparing for and what has happened?
Good day. Thank you for having me. Well, the plan for this year was really to compete in more Taekwondo competitions at the national level, because for karate in my organization, this would have been an off year. And so I would have been training with my instructors mainly for Taekwondo, to prepare myself to compete for more of the national tournaments. And for karate, it would have been preparation for the preparation for the 2021 IKD World Tournament.
Now, while you're in lockdown, how is it affected? I know your training would have been affected, but take me through things like just nutrition, mental health, and things that Mrs. Reifer had mentioned as things being affected by COVID-19. What has changed in terms of just dietary intake and ensuring that you maintain your weights?
Well, nutrition-wise, it hasn't been less. Some days I eat more than others, some days not so much. So it has been harder to maintain my diet. Well, even though that classes have been suspended physically, there is still online classes. So every Monday or Friday there is karate, and then on Saturday there's Taekwondo.
Amanda, here you have a BSc honors in accounting and finance. That's Shannan. But coming down to your own sports programs at Gayle, what sort of advice do you have for your students now? Because they're student athletes. The athlete has kind of gone through the window. What do they do from the student part?
The good thing is that we as Blackbirds, and my Blackbirds would know very well that we are not defined by our current circumstances. So there's still sport and activity going on. But let me just shift focus to the academic side. We have within our academy a resource person in Miss Catherine Stewart, a student athlete academic advisor, who her job is to work with every single student athlete. We have over 150. She monitors them. She has been following up with them. Any issues that they have from an academic standpoint, we do peer tutoring. There's a whole process that goes into student athlete support that has allowed many of them to weather the storm, so to speak. We've created WhatsApp group chats. We've created Zoom calls and Zoom forums for social and other academic uses. So we've really been trying to engage our students, find out how many of them have laptops, how many of them have difficulties with connectivity, in order to be able to complete their classes and their assignments. So we're doing what we can. We know that this is a challenge, but we're doing what we can. But from the sporting side, if I could just speak a little bit about that, the coaches have been doing a lot of virtual and online one-on-one sessions. Athletes have been sending through videos to their coaches. And so there's still some activity going on where that is concerned. My concern was the nutrition aspect and the mental health aspect. I know I keep flogging that, Dean, and I know we have a session coming up on mental health, but this is an area, give an example to the panel as we share some of the stories. We had some feedback coming back to us that one or two students were going into serious depression because they were isolated so much so from their peers, and of course, this was a great concern. We moved quickly because we do have a psychologist, a counselor at the university. But if we didn't know, if we didn't have the relationship with these athletes, we would never know. And it's a concern, and I'm sure colleagues on the panel today may speak about some instances where they've found mental health issues within our athletes and in our environments. So I go back to that, and I go back to nutrition as well. Persons come from different economic backgrounds, and although we're able to provide some means of nutrition and food for them while they're on campus, we were very concerned of those Barbadian students who are home. We know from, lesser privileges that would be at risk. So these are all very, very important matters that I believe that we must address and continue to shed light on.
Dorothy, Hudson Gayle from Mona, mental issues with your student athletes, and we're talking about just, natural responses to not being able to go out there and perform and the uncertainty. Is that a major problem that's been expressed?
It is not a major problem that has been expressed, but we are fortunate to have on our team a sports psychologist and Dr. Olivia Rose Esperance, and she has been working tirelessly with our athletes. She's been meeting with the coaches, she's been meeting with team managers, and she's been meeting with each team, each sporting team from the university, and of course encouraging the one-on-one discussions with her and so on. So we've been fortunate to have her, working along with them. And also because we have been involved with them with these other development programs, we are able to reach out to them. I know a few people have been sad about being caught in Jamaica, not being able to go home and things like that. And we have, met with them individually. We do also have a few alumni who has been helping to, work with the students from the teams that they were involved in while they were on campus. So we haven't had any major issues. We haven't heard anyone really complain about major issues, but I know Dr. Rose has been working tremendously with our group of athletes.
Well, let's put you both on the spot then. Emmanuel Stewart and Shannan, what has been your sort of reach by the institution? We go to Emmanuel, who himself is in the faculty of sport, and also, as you said, professional cricketer. But have you felt that there's been a void which either has been filled or not been filled by the faculty and by the university?
Well, I would really love to credit the sports faculty of Gabre for the work that they have done. Of course, you mentioned my GPA earlier. It's not something that I put huge focus on. It's always a challenge balancing school and cricket, but I've been able to manage. That's down to having great lecturers and great people at the faculty of sport, and also just being able to manage my time better. I remember when I first entered the institution, I just looked at it as just trying to pass. And after my first semester, when I looked at my GPA, even though it didn't matter then, it wasn't satisfying to me personally. So I said, I just can't just walk through these walls just looking to pass, but try to get more A's, B pluses. And I've reached out to Catherine a lot, and she has helped me a lot, feeling a leave of absence and those type of things, and putting together my schedule as to when I should be in the study room and those stuff. So it's been really, really beneficial to me personally, and I'm pretty sure that other students can say that as well. Also with the coaches there, phenomenal. I get to do a lot of one-on-one work when I'm during the first class season. There's always a week break. So during the week break, when I return to Barbados, I just go to the coaches and say, all right, I need to work on X, I need to work on Y, and they've given me the undivided attention. I'll be able to work on whatever is necessary. So
sure, we're still waiting on those comments and questions online. But Shannan, tell me, as a accounts and finance student and an athlete who's now confined to home, has there been a void that's been either filled or still remains with regards to COVID-19 and your sport?
Well, given the nature of both of my sports, there are actually contact, one being more heavier contact than rest. So when it comes to training, there isn't that constant feedback on forms and how I'm progressing or whatever, because there's no one there to actually give me the feedback. And when it comes to the sparring, obviously there's no one for me to practice with, so there's been the void there. And then I don't have my teammate next to me while training to help me to push, because it's actually harder to stay motivated and to push yourself when you're by yourself, because you just easily give up. So there's been that absence there. However, my coaches have been checking up on me constantly, making sure that I'm still keeping up with my strength and flexibility.
I'm going to introduce our next guest, Chang, who is a student at Mona, pursuing his BSc in Sport Kinetics in the Faculty of Sport, but is also a champion discus thrower, having been a gold medalist at the Penn Games, Penn Relays, and the World Under Youth Championships in 2018, along with a silver at the Carifta Games that year. Moved on to a gold at the Carifta Games in 2019, gold at Penn's in 2019, and fourth in the Under-23 NACAC competition. And this year went on to get fourth place in the Under-20 Pan Am competition as a discus thrower. Kai, you're welcome to the program, and of course your experience as an athlete is obviously well known. But tell us about your student side of things, the Sport Kinetic program, how it's been affected by COVID, and has there been a void that needed to be filled while we've been trying to sort of adjust to this new norm?
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Mansingh. As it pertains to sport and my academics, it's always a very hard thing to balance. I always try to strike a balance between it. I always try to implement good training schedules so I can, how do you say?
Sort of marry the two.
Yeah, I try to just put them together to ensure that it works well. Oftentimes my training does overthrow academics, and I have to put it out the door. And I don't say that to discredit my dean of the faculty, because the faculty of sport is a very good faculty. They look out for you. My teachers, my lecturers, they're very supportive and they're very helpful. They give me pointers here and there when I'm falling short, and I have to respect that. I didn't really expect that type of treatment at university. And the transition of being a junior to a senior, it's so great. It's so strange and hard, to be honest, because when you're a junior, the life is easy. Like you get certain privileges. When you're a senior, you have to take on the role of responsibility. Everything you have to be doing on your own. You have to be responsible for your own meals. You have to be responsible for your own training, time management. So it gets hard as it pertains to being a senior athlete, and especially knowing that I'm a fresher. There are still a few things that I'm yet to experience. I try to develop good friendships along the line. And one of the most disappointing things about COVID-19 is that I had a few competitions this year that I look forward to, such as, the Penn Relays, a few games in April, and Jamaica trials. Like this year was supposed to be an Olympic year, and I look forward to that so much. I'm really disappointed that the trials was put back.
Well, youth is on your side, but any mentors at Mona that sort of helped you through this period?
Any mentors?
Yes, anybody that you look up to in terms of supporting in your pursuits.
Well, my number one mentor would be my coach, Mr. Julian Robinson. He has been there for me since Calabar High School, coming up to UE. He continues to maintain a certain relationship with me, so we know that we don't lose sight of the goal at hand. Mm-hmm. I also have a good relationship with my teacher, Dr. Olivia Rose. She's a very good sports psychologist. I would recommend her to anybody. She's real good. She's very good at motivating. Right. I can put that out there. She's a really good motivator, and she can maintain dialogue very well, and I respect her for that. So those are my two mentors, and they've helped me along this way. Sure.
Comment there by Mr. McTair?
It's very interesting to hear the perspective of athletes within this particular situation, and I think it's also fantastic that athletes are getting so much support. That is, very, very vital. What I would like to find out, though, I'm just throwing it out there to the athletes among us. how do you self-motivate? I think that is one of the things that athletes who are not necessarily at university and may not have that same connection with faculty and coach and that kind of stuff. How do you stay self-motivated? If you could just give the audience an idea as to how you do it for yourself to make sure you try your best to get in your training sessions, even though you don't have your friends around, even though you don't have your coach with you, make sure your nutrition is on point, keep your mind engaged into what the future is, even though the future is a bit unknown.
Who wants to take that? Who wants to take that one, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. All right, so one of the basic principles in being an athlete is having or practicing good self-efficacy. So you have to believe that you can accomplish and do a particular or reach towards a particular goal at some point in the development. And you must also set goals. So whilst setting goals, I am the key factor in this particular situation. So though people are, onlookers, sorry, my connection is very unstable. Yeah. Though onlookers may see it as, important to have a good support staff and a good support system, it's also good for the athlete to believe in himself or herself to be able to participate or to do that particular thing.
Shannan, I see you smiling. How do you stay motivated?
Well, I have a goal in mind, so there are things in both Taekwondo and martial arts in general that you have to continue to train and help and to improve yourself. There's one in karate saying about water that isn't kept boiling, after time it will return to its normal state. So we have to keep on training to get to those goals and to continue to improve ourselves.
I think we have a question from a member of the audience, Asnith.
Right, Dwayne Extol is asking, in light of COVID-19, will student athletes who are on scholarships be affected?
So if you haven't heard that, in light of COVID-19, will students on scholarships be affected? Starting off with Mona, Dorothy, Hudson, Gayle.
Honestly, I am hoping not, and we're trying to ensure that we can maintain the students who are on scholarship. But again, it's a wait and see situation, because if the financial stability of the institution is so affected that they might, have problems even paying salaries and things like that, I don't know that they're going to be continuing to fund the scholarships. However, we're hoping that things won't get to that situation. The plan is to continue to have our scholarship program going through the 2021 academic year.
Amanda.
Knowing my principal, I would say categorically that we will continue to support those student athletes currently on scholarships. What I would say, what may be impacted would be the new students possibly, depending on the financial situation. So I don't want any of my scholarship athletes to feel anyway fearful, because I know the principal will support their continuing through the length of their degree program.
And what I'd like to add is that the university is very sensitive across all our campuses to what the students are going through. And so when it comes to the academic side of things, as you realize, all the teaching has gone on online in terms of a virtual platform, and all the examinations are done to facilitate students across the board, so that whether they have stable internet connectivity or not, they can at least do their examinations through various means, through assignments, through offline exams, etc. Furthermore, any hardship that's being faced by a student in either fee payment or even not passing their courses because of this thing would probably be considered, and I'm sure that there would be some moves along the way to make sure that they're not penalized severely. With regards to the sports programs themselves, as mentioned, the university is affected as heavily as anybody else with regards to funding. And of course, all attempts will be made to try and at least keep the scholarship athletes that we have. service. So both Kai, Emmanuel, and Shannan, yourself, they all can breathe easy that sports, once it can start, will be maintained. But the truth is that we do live in the reality of an economic meltdown that's going to be bigger than something that's been seen either in 2008 or at the Great Depression. It seems like it's going to be world over, and all of us are going to be hit by that one way or the other. So the commitment is there, the will is there. As Kai says, he likes to overthrow. He's a discus thrower, but we'll try and overextend ourselves as much as we can. But very good question there. We're going to encourage people to keep asking their questions. So the question really was this motivation. And, the problem I have, Mr. McTair, is how do all of us motivate ourselves when we don't know what the end point is? So you're there at a government level in Trinidad and Tobago. Things change every week. How do you sort of keep a certain goal in mind?
I think the first thing that is important is just to be aware. Is to be aware of what is going on. Inform yourself, and you try to keep communication with the national governing bodies, and you hope the national governing bodies in turn try to keep in contact with athletes. In the case of schools, the same. You hope that coaches are also maintaining contact with their charges, just to try to make sure that as best as possible, people, when I say people, athletes rather, are able to maintain the sort of mental capacity that would allow them to get through this. There are many things that are, as you mentioned, there are many things that are going to change. There are many things that are uncertain. I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking of in team sports, for example, a sport like football, where a goal is scored and everybody runs and hugs the other player and that kind, how is that going to be affected?
Stop scoring goals.
Goal celebrations. How are goal celebrations going to be affected moving forward? A wicket is taken in cricket. How is that going to be affected? I mean, I have to give air high fives and that kind of thing. There are many things that that exist in this particular situation that are unknown. I think, though, one of the things that we can't do is to fear the unknown. And I think it would not be prudent of any one of us, especially athletes, to be afraid of what is to come. The most we can do is to keep some level of consistency with the necessary dimensions.
I think we lost connectivity there. But I'm just going to put to the students amongst us, that's Shannan, Emmanuel, and Kai. And I'm going to start with Emmanuel. You suddenly have virtual classes, right? You have classes online, you have teaching that's taking place online. How difficult has that been for you?
Coming down to the end of the semester, I've had a few virtual classes. Luckily, we've made a lot of headway in the syllabus or in the course outline. So I never had like much classes to be a part of or scheduled. So right now I'm in a phase where I have assessments. So from Monday to Wednesday, I will probably have 4 essays to write during that period. It's been challenging because, sometimes you have to be on those virtual calls for like 2 hours, and sometimes there were students that were falling asleep and those sort of things. So, it was challenging, but again, if it is that you want to get to university at a certain time period and you want to pass your courses, these are sacrifices that you have to make. And during this time, we have to make a lot of sacrifices as athletes. And I think once you know your why and why you started and where you want to get as an athlete, then this should just be another challenge that we will overcome, because we've had challenges already throughout our athletic career. I'm pretty sure about that.
Who better to deal with it than an athlete, I guess? Shannan, online classes, is that the way of the future? You've got you muted, yeah.
Well, I'm currently doing the PCS, so it's more of a self-studying process for me, because I actually have to set a study time every day to make sure I study, or at least every week to make sure I study.
So you're kind of used to this already. I think we have some questions here from our audience. Asnith?
Yes, Richard Goddard is asking, among high school, university, and national representative athletes, which of these are most susceptible to loss of form and motivation?
So amongst high school, national and international athletes, who's more susceptible to loss of form
And motivation.
and motivation? Well, let's go to the athletes themselves. Kai, are you susceptible to loss of motivation, and would you be if you're an international athlete versus a high school athlete?
Definitely. I think all athletes right now are susceptible to a loss of motivation. Champs being cancelled. I know a lot of athletes who were looking towards participating at champs. A lot of them have stopped training completely. Some of them are now focusing on perfecting their CAPE and CSET grades to be able to get a good scholarship. So everyone right now is affected. If everyone is being affected, me as a university student, it's very hard as well on me. It's just a big issue, and we are all being affected. So I can't rule out by saying that one athlete is being affected.
Yeah.
All athletes are.
It might just be the individual themselves, but Amanda Reifer, you've been with athletes of all levels, and in fact you have from the highest level of cricketers going down to just club cricketers. Does one get affected more than the others with regards to top performance?
I would say in some instances, an elite athlete or a national athlete may have more support around the individual, from coaches, from finances, and so. And they're at the stage in their career where they know what they want. They're just about on the cusp, so they're more focused. I would say with Olympics next year, I'm sure that all of those Olympic hopefuls will be equally focused. Their coaches will be working with them. Their psychologists, they have an entire team around them. Who I would argue would be a little more despondent and affected would be the high school students, those juniors, because they're now coming through. Yes, they have goals, but it's not at the same level. And so I would argue, as we are an academic institution, that maybe the juniors, maybe the teenagers.
I tend to agree with you. Tend to agree with you because they may not have something to go back to. It might be their final year at that level, whereas as you go on, it's an unlimited field. And of course, maturity comes in as well. Another quick question that we'll squeeze in before I get to Emmanuel Stewart with another question.
Right. Dana Atkinson is asking, will all intercollegiate competitions and upcoming ones such as UWI Games and local meets still be hosted next year despite the financial repercussions?
Well, of course, there are two sides to it. One is the financial repercussion, and the other is whether COVID will be around or not. But Dorothy, Hudson, Gayle, President of Intercollegiate Association of Jamaica.
Whether or not these competitions will be held is really a wait-and-see situation. If it is possible, we will start, maybe, we're following the lead of the country, or of the world, actually, to see how they're doing things and how we can put things in place because to continue these sports. For example, we just canceled football in Jamaica, or the JFF just canceled football in Jamaica. Football is a first semester sport. So if Premier League is going to be played in the first semester starting in September, we at Intercol will say, yes, maybe continue, we will start our program also. However, we have to be mindful of making sure that we protect the athletes and protect the community because, so we have to put all these things in place to ensure that we can protect the sanitizing and so on. Do we have the funds to do so? That again is another consideration. So it's a lot to take into consideration, and of course to just keep from one day to the next, checking on how things are developing across the different islands. For UWI Games, Amanda, you might be able to help me up on this one. If the institution and Dean, it all depends again on the finances more than anything else with the UWI Games.
Well, for a start, yeah. For a start, the bigger question is, will UWI take place next semester? Because, we just don't know what's happening with COVID even on UWI Games. But what I will tell you is that it was scheduled to be at St. Augustine. And, it's a scenario where the games will take place. Whether it take place next year or the year after is dependent on what the health situation is. And that's too early to call upon. But, if things get better, I think there's still enough lead time to have a game like that as long as it's safe. As time is running out, and it really has been a very good discussion, Emmanuel Stewart, one thing on everybody's mind, and I'm sure it's on your mind, will there be a CPL this year?
I've heard a lot of talks about having the CPL without an audience. I can't picture that, to be honest. It will be. It's to me personally, it's hard to say. I don't know, but as CPL, they still have to continue with their protocols. I've seen teams release the retainers, the retained players. So
do you have your eyes on playing this year?
What they can do. Pardon me?
Do you have your eyes on playing this year in the CPL?
I'm in the draft. So
you're in the draft.
Picked up then.
So with the possibility that it may take place in August, it may take place in September, and it goes back to one of the questions that was asked. How do you keep yourself kind of there and thereabouts, but not quite at the top of your form because you don't know when you're going to have to unleash it?
Sure, it's scheduled for August 19th. Again, as Kai said, it's pretty hard as to how to manage your workload, and that is something that over time I'll have to figure out. And again, keeping in form, I think it's very challenging for a cricketer.
Well, we're winding down with time. I'm going to just open up the floor to any comment that any of the panelists may want to make before we bring this session to an end. Is there anything that's left to be said?
Yes, Dane, I wanted to make mention, we spoke a lot about the uncertainty, and there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of fear mongering, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but I believe that there's an old saying, never waste a good crisis. So I would like to leave the panel and the viewers with some ideas that I was thinking about as an administrator. And my attention has swiftly gone to esports because I recently watched a FISU America esport competition where one of our athletes, Nikolai Lovell of the Barbados Community College, he topped his group and he did very well in that competition. He was knocked out by Chile. But nonetheless, it sparked my interest, and I started to research more about esport. And as we're talking about funding and financial challenges, I started to think, well, this is an area that we need to focus on heavily, because right now they're projecting that in 2020, $1.5 billion will be generated in annual revenues, with sponsorships taking most of that, and a global audience of 600 million viewers. So I'm saying that as we look at innovative, out-of-the-box ideas as the sporting region, we need to take a serious look at esport and what we can do to start to enter into that 1.5 billion that we can maybe prop up our other sporting programs, one, and two, whereas on our campus, for example, cricket may be the flagship sport that generates the majority of the income and the sponsorship. In 2 to 3 years, Dean and panelists, esport may be that, carrying the weight of all the other sports as we try to capitalize on opportunities through this new industry.
You would have heard last week that the International Olympic Committee, spoke to the International E-Sporting Organization about alliances. You would have heard maybe 3 months ago or so, where US universities were offering for the first time scholarships in esport. I'm happy to tell you that at our St. Augustine Academy of Sport, we actually had an esport event about 2 years ago. We had some seminars on esport in conjunction with the Open Campus last year, because that was one of the foci that we had from early o'clock, and something that we've got to recognize is one of the accepted sort of ways of displaying sporting prowess in the future. But as time draws to an end, I'd like to thank firstly all of our guests, Chang, Shannan Skeete, and before that, Mr. Keith Wellington, our panelists, Gabre-Jesu McTair from Trinidad and Tobago, Emanuel Stewart from Grenada via Carriacou, Dorothy Hudson Gayle from the Mona Academy of Sport in Jamaica, and of course Amanda Reifer from the Cable Academy of Sport. Just to remind listeners that we will have 2 more of these fora next week, looking at athletes and those things that we mentioned today, the mental health, nutrition, how to stay fit, once again comprising of professional athletes and the experts in the Caribbean, especially through the Faculty of Sport. And in a fortnight, we'll be talking to the administrators. We'll be having the Honorable Minister of Sport of Barbados, Mr. John King, along with other ministers in the region and top administrators. I'd like to thank, last of all and most importantly, all of you who tuned in to be part of this forum, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much, and good afternoon throughout the Caribbean, and good evening in the rest of the world.